Okay, we're returning back to the Roman lecture, and this is the part that covers basically what happens after Rome falls. Um, Now, I wanted to quickly talk about Augustine one more time. I know I already mentioned um, the way that he did a couple things for Christian history in particular, or the history of intellectual thought. One is that he makes the idea of original sin, this Christian theology that says that God created the universe, created the first parents, Adam and Eve, and that when Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, that all the human beings following them inherited a sin nature. And so, in other words, we have a propensity to sin. That's just natural to human beings. So, this is the idea of a sin nature. And you could probably think about issues like of guilt and shame that comes with desire. This all comes back to, in some ways, Augustine. And you can see him agonizing that over that in his autobiography, The Confessions, and arguably this is one of the first autobiographies in human history. So that's one thing that you get, especially in the Latin-speaking Roman church. So thinking of the Western Church, um, it's very much following Saint Augustine of Hippo, which is in North Africa. So that's another thing I want to mention is that Augustine is just another example of a major Christian thinker located in North Africa. Now, when I say North Africa, we are talking about um, the Roman Empire still. So this takes us to the next point that yes, Rome, the Western Empire, falls in the 5th century, but there is the Eastern Empire that continues. And in fact, what we call the Byzantine Empire, the empire located in Constantinople, if you recall, when Emperor Constantine became Emperor of Rome, he basically set up shop in modern day Turkey around Greece. So this is the Eastern Empire. So this empire of Rome in the East is Greek speaking. Um, it features a different type of theology and a different type of emperor. So we're gonna look at that before going back to Rome and look at the way Rome responds to the fall, or I should say, the Roman Church responds to the fall of the city of Rome. So when you're talking about Byzantium and the Eastern Empire in the 5th and 6th century, before the rise of Islam, where we have to first start with Emperor Justinian and his wife Theodora. I encourage you to check out the video here. It's also on your in your module. Justinian is important because he basically creates Roman law, does these big building projects in the Eastern Roman Empire, and so it becomes the greatness of Rome continues under Justinian. It's not without problems. In fact, for all the I think his the story with him and his wife is fascinating. You'll see in the video, but I do think he does rule with not a lot of popularity at times, and you see this with the Nika riots at the Hippodrome, and then also the time where he um, gets the plague. This one of the major global plagues hits under his reign. It comes from the east, and you have to think again, big picture. The Christian Roman East is still connected to the rest of the East via the Silk Roads. There is no Islam as of yet, and so there are still trading routes going here. Whereas the Christian West has lost some of that connection, which is why some historians would say it goes into a dark age. Um, the big controversy in the Eastern Church has to do with icons. So I gave you a couple examples of icons. Here's one right here. This is an icon of the Madonna, the mother of Jesus, Mary, and then the baby Jesus, who looks like a little man here. Now icons are not just straight up supposed to be like um realistic presentations of the figures. The idea of the baby Jesus as a little man here represents the Christian idea of the incarnation of Jesus as God. So that's why he's like a little man, right? He's representing the idea of the incarnation, that God became a human, right? This stuff that the early church argued about, especially at the Council of Nicaea. And here's another icon of Jacob's ladder, where in some ways you see the struggle of Christian mysticism, something we're going to be diving into in a couple of weeks. But I think it's very illustrative of the Neoplatonism that's hit in the East as well. Neoplatonism believed there's layers of spiritual realms all the way up into heaven, and that part of the mystic track is to kind of like go up this quote unquote spiritual ladder. Now, so icons are very big in Eastern Orthodoxy, and Eastern Orthodoxy is just what we call the church that starts in Greece. Elements of it will also be developed in places like Armenia and Russia, etc. So it's Eastern Christianity. Icons are big. You'll see pictures like this all throughout there, and they're meant to be reminders of great spiritual truths, right? So they're kind of windows into heaven, as some would call it. Well, it got to the point that some of the language of the Bible that talked about idol worship influenced some leaders in the Eastern Church to start to destroy the icons as idolatry, right? Idolatry is worshiping something instead of God. And so there's this big controversy where you have the iconoclasts who are destroying the icons and the iconodules who are revering the icons. And I mean, it got so big that even the emperor was involved. This eventually John Damascus writes an essay. You're now in the 8th century, so now you're in the age of Islam, and he's actually living an Islamic rule. He writes that icons are just copies and reminders of the original, so they can't be idolatry. That you're not actually worshiping them; you're just utilizing them to think about the real spiritual lesson or spiritual figure. Or quote the Bible of the illiterate. Because you gotta think not everybody is literate. Well, most people are not literate in this day and age. So that's the way they can kind of continue piety and spirituality. So the East gets over it, and if you ever go to Eastern Orthodox church, you would see this kind of stuff being portrayed. Now, in the West, going back to Rome has no problems with statues of the saints or pictures of the saints. In fact, they're going to promote it. But what happens is the figure of Gregory the Great, Bishop of Rome, and arguably concretely the first Pope of Rome, will kind of go on this recovery mission. He sends missionaries to the north of Rome, and the big thing is he wants to recover the glory of the Empire of Rome, also this church, and basically make Western Europe Christian. And within the first few centuries, this is exactly what's eventually going to happen: is that you're going to have Western Europe become Christianized under the umbrella of the papal power. And then you'll start to see that spirituality and the structure of what we know of as the Catholic Church come into fruition fully after Gregory the Great. So eventually, though, these two sides, the Eastern Church and Empire, and the Western Church and what's going to be called the Holy Roman Empire, are going to be at odds. But that's something to look forward to in a couple of weeks. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about how far Christianity had spread. A form called Nestorianism from the theologian Nestorius, made its way all the way into China. You can see this um, structure of the cross and the lotus. So you see like the combination of Buddhism and Christianity in China. And in fact, I teased this out a few weeks ago, but there was a bishop named Adam who actually was one of the first translators of the Buddhist texts in China around the 8th century. So they're very involved. There's not just a fringe movement there. This is a very involved Christianity in China, enough that they were doing translation efforts and advising administrators. Now they kind of have a venture, and this is interesting. So while you have this kind of almost cosmopolitan spirit in this figure of Adam in the 8th century, in the West, the Christian West, over there in around the Germanic kingdoms, you have Emperor Charlemagne doing a mass baptism of Germanic people just automatically, and also killing thousands for resisting his kind of Christian empire that he's trying to spread. So it kind of gives you a clue about the differences between Western and Eastern Christianities. In fact, if you're wondering, like, well, whatever happened to Chinese Christianity, the big heyday for Eastern Christianity was the rise of the Mongols. Some of the first Mongol leaders converted to Christianity, to Nestorian Christianity, especially once they married into Christian families. They took a Christian wife. But when Ghazan converted to Islam, you start to see the falling apart of Nestorian influence, and then once the Mongols get the boot, um, then eventually the Nestorians kind of just cease to exist. Not completely. As we'll see a little bit later, you'll see some examples of even Eastern Chinese Christians having conversations with Western Christians someday. So there was conversation. There was this aspect like, oh, hey, I didn't know there are Christians over there. Kind of reality. And even when we think like in the early modern era, when the Portuguese and the Spanish show up in the Indian Ocean, around Columbus time period, in China, they're like, oh yeah, we know about that kind of stuff. So there is that kind of sense there. Um, Finally, and I do want you to watch this video. I think it's fascinating. It's a short little video that I'd like you to watch. Ethiopia also becomes a Christian kingdom, one of the earliest ones to do that. So Ethiopia, if you know, is south to Egypt. It is one of the major areas of Christian thought, Christian piety in history, all the way into the modern era, even contemporary. And it's not just connected to Christianity, but it's also connected to Judaism. There's this whole tradition. Again, if you watch the video, see this whole tradition about like following Sabbath laws and dietary practice. That's way more connected to the first or Old Testament of the Bible, and not as much the New Testament. But there is all these traditions and myths that go into Ethiopian Christianity. And you can kind of see in this image here this kind of Eastern art as well, for Ethiopian piety in their churches. We'll talk a little bit more about King Lalibela in a few weeks, but the biggest struggle Ethiopia will have, since it is located in Africa, is when northern Africa becomes Muslim. It'll have some battles between these different nations, right? Because Egypt, which was Christian at this time period, and still has what's called Coptic Christianity, they're going to be a minority once Egypt becomes Islamic. And we'll be looking at that next week.